In the frozen forests of the Ardennes in December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge exploded into chaos almost overnight. American soldiers, many of them young, exhausted, and untested, suddenly found themselves facing some of Germany's most experienced and determined units. These were not retreating forces anymore. These were battle-hardened veterans, equipped with machine guns, mortars, and an unshakable belief that one last massive offensive could turn the war around. The weather was brutal. Supply lines were strained, and visibility was often reduced to just a few yards. It was the kind of environment where advanced weapons didn't always matter as much as grit, instincts, and whatever you could carry in your pockets. And in that pocket, more often than not, was a small, unremarkable object that cost about 50 cents to produce. The American fragmentation grenade didn't look impressive. It wasn't elegant. It didn't have the mechanical complexity of German weaponry. And it certainly didn't inspire fear the way a tank or artillery barrage did. But in the close, suffocating combat of the Ardennes, it became one of the most effective tools the U.S. Army had. German tactics relied heavily on coordinated infantry pushes, using cover from trees, foxholes, and buildings to close the distance. Once the fighting compressed into forests and villages, battles were decided at terrifyingly close range. That's where the grenade came into its own. American soldiers used grenades to break momentum. When German infantry surged forward through snow-covered woods, grenades could shatter those formations instantly. A single throw into a cluster of troops or a shallow trench could stop an advance cold, buying precious seconds or minutes that often meant the difference between holding a position or being overrun. In towns, grenades were used to clear rooms, stairwells, and basements where enemy soldiers hid, turning deadly ambush points into reclaimed ground. There was no need for pinpoint accuracy or perfect conditions. You pulled the pin, counted your seconds, and let gravity and explosive force do the rest. What made this even more powerful was how accessible it was. Unlike heavy weapons that required crews, maintenance, or ammunition resupply, grenades were simple. Any soldier could use one. In moments when communication broke down and officers were cut off, grenades allowed small groups of Americans to fight independently and effectively. They didn't need tanks to arrive or air support to break through clouds. They could defend a road, a bridge, or a frozen tree line with what they already had on hand. German troops quickly learned to fear this. Their doctrine emphasized movement and aggression, but grenades punished that aggression brutally. Charging across open snow or bunching up behind cover was exactly what American soldiers needed to exploit. Even elite German units, including Waffen-SS formations, found themselves stalled or pushed back by defenders who had nothing more than rifles, determination, and a handful of grenades. It was warfare stripped down to its most basic level. Who could outlast the other in the cold, chaos, and terror of close combat? There was also a psychological effect that shouldn't be underestimated. The sound of a grenade landing nearby, followed by that split second of silence before the blast, induced panic even among seasoned troops. In the dense forests of the Ardennes, explosions echoed unpredictably, making it hard to tell where the next one would come from. This uncertainty slowed German advances and forced them to move more cautiously. Exactly the opposite of what their offensive required. Every delayed assault, every halted push, worked against the tight timetable Germany needed to succeed. Meanwhile, American troops gained confidence, knowing they had a reliable, effective weapon they could trust in the worst situations mattered immensely. When you're cold, hungry, and surrounded, morale can collapse quickly. But the grenade gave soldiers a sense of control. It was something tangible they could rely on, even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. In foxholes and ruined villages, that mattered just as much as firepower. The irony is that this weapon's power didn't come from innovation or cutting-edge design. It came from simplicity and scale. The grenade was cheap, rugged, and easy to mass produce, which meant American units were rarely without them. While Germany struggled with shortages and increasingly complex weapons systems, the United States leaned into reliability. The result was a battlefield where a low-cost tool could repeatedly blunt the efforts of a technologically sophisticated enemy. By the time the German offensive began to stall, the impact of these countless small encounters became clear. It wasn't one dramatic explosion or heroic last stand that turned the tide. It was thousands of moments where American soldiers held their ground, pushed back attacks, and survived long enough for reinforcements to arrive. And again, the humble grenade played a role in those moments. In a battle often remembered for tanks, generals, and massive troop movements, it's easy to overlook the importance of something so small. But on the frozen ground of the Ardennes, this 50-cent grenade proved that wars aren't always won by the most advanced weapons. Sometimes, they're won by the simplest ones, used relentlessly, at exactly the right moment. While the fighting in the Ardennes often looked chaotic from the ground, there was a massive, invisible force shaping the outcome of the Battle of the Bulge far from the front lines, thousands of miles away. American factories were operating around the clock, pouring out weapons, ammunition, and equipment at a scale the world had never seen before. This industrial machine didn't just produce tanks and aircraft. It produced the small, unglamorous tools of survival in staggering numbers. Among them were millions of fragmentation grenades. Cheap to make, easy to ship, and absolutely essential once the fighting turned close and personal. This mattered because the German offensive depended on speed and shock. Their plan was to punch through thin American lines, capture key road junctions, and move faster than Allied logistics could respond. But that plan ran headfirst into a reality Germany couldn't overcome. The United States could replace men and materiel faster than the Germans could destroy them. Even as American units were pushed back in the opening days of the attack, supply lines bent but did not break. Trucks still rolled forward when roads allowed it. And when they did, they carried crates filled with the same simple weapons soldiers already knew how to use. Grenades became a perfect example of how mass production translated directly into battlefield resilience. Because they were so inexpensive and straightforward to manufacture, they were issued in large quantities. Soldiers weren't forced to ration them for some imagined future fight. They could use them aggressively, clearing enemy positions, breaking attacks, and surviving encounters that might otherwise have ended very differently. This abundance changed behavior. Troops fought with confidence, knowing they could rely on a steady flow of basic tools rather than waiting for specialized support that might never arrive in bad weather. The contrast with German logistics was stark. By late 1944, Germany was stretched thin. Allied bombing had damaged factories. Fuel shortages were crippling movement, and increasingly complex weapon designs slowed production. While German engineers continued to develop advanced systems, those weapons often arrived too late, in too few numbers, or without the fuel and spare parts needed to keep them operational. American strategy, by contrast, embraced standardization. The same grenade used in Normandy was used in the Ardennes, and soldiers trained with it knew exactly what it could do under pressure. This consistency paid off when the weather grounded Allied aircraft and removed one of America's greatest advantages. For weeks, air power couldn't decisively influence the battle. What remained was ground combat, fought by infantry units under extreme conditions. In those moments, it wasn't flashy technology that mattered. It was whether soldiers had ammunition, food, winter clothing, and weapons that worked every single time. The grenade fit perfectly into that equation. It didn't freeze up. It didn't rely on complex maintenance. It worked in snow, mud, and ruined buildings. As the German advance slowed, American production continued to surge. Fresh units arrived with full equipment loads, and battered formations were reinforced rather than abandoned. The constant availability of grenades allowed defensive positions to harden over time. Each failed German assault depleted their limited resources, while American forces could absorb losses and continue fighting. This imbalance gradually turned the offensive into a war of attrition that Germany simply could not win. There was also a strategic ripple effect. The ability to supply vast numbers of grenades supported flexible tactics. American commanders could rely on infantry to hold ground while armor and artillery regrouped. Small units could conduct aggressive counterattacks without waiting for heavy support. Roads, villages, and forests that had been contested one day could be reclaimed the next, often through close quarters fighting where grenades dominated. This constant pressure prevented German forces from consolidating their gains and forced them into a defensive posture earlier than planned. Over time, the German timetable collapsed. Fuel ran out, units became isolated, and the momentum of the offensive faded. What replaced it was a grinding retreat under constant pressure. By then, the weather had cleared, Allied air power returned, and the outcome was no longer in doubt. But the foundation for that reversal had been laid earlier. In the days when American infantry held on with whatever they had, supported by a supply system that refused to fail. The story of the Battle of the Bulge is often told through the lens of dramatic counterattacks and famous commanders, but the quieter truth lies in logistics and production. Victory didn't hinge on a single breakthrough or miracle weapon. It came from the relentless ability to equip soldiers faster than the enemy could wear them down. The grenade, humble and inexpensive, embodied that philosophy perfectly. By the end of the battle, Germany's last major offensive in the West had been shattered. Not because the Allies had a secret superweapon, but because they had mastered the art of sustained warfare. Millions of small, reliable tools, produced cheaply and delivered consistently, allowed ordinary soldiers to do extraordinary things. In that sense, the 50-cent grenade wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of an industrial and logistical advantage that made victory inevitable.